Hello students, welcome to this tutorial of nursing education. So in today's session, we are just going to devise a past paper on how to answer essay questions, also touching on the part of understanding the question. So now this is a 2019 exam question from UNZA, and these were the essay questions which was adding up to 65% of the total exams. And this is how questions were placed. So now we have about 5 essays which are supposed to be written in this particular exam. Now I'm going to learn you through on how you answer these particular questions, and also touching some component on understanding the question as well, because it's very much important, especially when you are writing these short essay questions. Understanding the question also matters. So now let's go into the question. So we have question 1, which is saying mention 4 purposes of instructional design. So now in mentioning 4 purposes of instructional design, you must be able to understand 2 key terms in this question. So we have purposes and we have instructional design. So let's look at what an instructional design is. So if you know an instructional design and then you know the purposes, you can state them. Okay. So what is an instructional design? An instructional design is just the process of planning, organizing, and creating lessons, or rather learning experiences in a particular way that can help a student learn effectively. That is what an instructional design it is. So it's about planning, organizing, just to make sure that a student learns something in an effective manner. And that's what an instructional design is. Now we're looking at the purpose. The purpose is more like the reason why. So we are going to give the reason why for instructional design. In other words, why is it important to plan, organize lessons in a way that the student can actually understand. So now we have 4 purposes of instructional design. One of them is to make learning effective. Okay. So this helps teachers plan lessons that meet learning objectives clearly. So the first one is to make learning effective. The second one is to organize teaching materials. Okay. So what is in the organizing teaching materials? You want to make sure that the content is arranged in a logical or simple order. Logical order, we want to actually give information to this student with one topic leading to the other. Then the third one is to meet learners' needs. Okay? So how are you going to meet learners' needs? Through planning, organizing, and creating lessons, you must be able to know the learner's level. Okay? Knowing the level of the learner and also looking at the interest of the learner. Okay? As well as the background of the learner. So if you incorporate all these, you are going to meet the needs of the learner. So if you know that in case where you find out that some audiovisual aids that can be used in a classroom are helping students more effective, then you can actually use that. You are going to meet the interest of the student. Then the last one on the purpose of instructional design is to guide the assessment. So through the planning, the arranging or rather creating of lessons, that's where actually you make the plan on how to assess a learner. So therefore, we can say that it's important to guide an assessment. You want to find the best way to check if the information that you gave them was understood by the learners or is understood by the learners. So those were 4 purposes of instructional design. Then let's go to question 2, which is saying list 6 innovative teaching approaches. List 6 innovative teaching approaches. So here in this question, we also need to identify some key terms. We have innovative as well as teaching approaches. So what does the word innovative mean? So innovative means new and creative ways of doing something. That's what innovative means. And how about teaching approaches? So teaching approaches, these are just methods teachers can use to help students learn. So we want to find, in other words, we want to look at the different methods that are creative a teacher can use to make a student understand. Okay, so now we have 1, problem solved learning. Problem based learning. So what is problem based learning? So problem based learning, it's a situation where students in a classroom, they learn by solving real life problems. Okay, so in a case where you were teaching, let's say you were teaching them pharmacology on how to calculate medication. Yes, after you teach them on how to calculate medication, and then you give them the similar or other related questions that exist, so that you see if at all they can apply their knowledge. That's problem based learning. And then we also have other approaches like simulation and role playing. So what are simulation and role playing? So in these kind of methods, students act out real situations to understand concepts. So in a case where in simulation and role playing, mostly these are done in the clinical areas. So mostly what is happening here is that we want to assume roles so that we make the student understand. So if I'm teaching a student on how to do, okay, let's say on how to give an injection, then we'll assume roles to say, okay, so you are going to be the sister in charge. You are going to be the student giving medication. So you should explain everything to the in charge here. Then they start doing that, and then you evaluate the problem that they make. That way, it makes them not forget. Then we have use of the third one. It is the use of technology. Okay, so the use of technology is very much important. Using of videos or online tools in order for someone to teach. So if someone watches maybe a video of what is happening, let's say you are teaching grade 12s, you are just done teaching them digestion, and then you take them into the computer lab, and then you display a 3D video for digestion, how it occurs. That way it's easy for them. You are just utilizing technology. And then the other teaching approach you can use is collaborative learning. So what is collaborative learning? It's in a situation where students work together in groups to learn from one another. Okay, they are there and maybe they are actually doing one common thing so that they learn from one another, evaluating their knowledge. And then apart from that, we have a flipped classroom. So what about flipped classroom? So most of the time, students will have to do something before they even attend classes. In cases where a student is actually watching some videos before the class or reading books at home before they attend the class, okay, and then just come for class maybe to like to strengthen their understanding, to deepen their understanding. That way it's much better. Okay, and then apart from that, we also have project-based learning. So the project-based learning, you just allow the students to complete a project to show their understanding of the topic. So this project can also include like research project where students have been given topics if they are to study the effect of social media on the attention span of nursing students, and then or effect of social media on the academic performance of nursing students. They are going to explore more, and at the end of the day, they are going to incorporate points that the group is going to understand. Okay, so that's all on question 2. Let's go to question 3. So question 3 is state 6 factors that influence the selection of audiovisual aids. 6 factors that influence the selection of audiovisual aids. So audiovisual aids is also a topic on its own in nursing education, and it's very much important. They like this question, asking this question. So now we need to look at key terms that we are looking for in this question. So the key term we have is an audiovisual aid. So what are audiovisual aids? So audiovisual aids, they are just basically teaching materials that use sound and video and visuals like pictures, charts, models, okay, to make sure that you make the student understand. And what are factors? Factors, of course, in this case, would say that things that can affect the teacher's choice of which aid to use, because there are different ways and the situations where you can use different aids. So now let's talk about 6 factors that influence the selection of audiovisual aids. What material are we going to use? What is going to influence the teacher's choice about what audiovisual aids to use? So we have 1, which is lesson objectives. Okay, the lesson objectives. How does a lesson objective become one of the factors that influence the selection of audiovisual aids? So on the lesson objective, you need to make sure that the aid that particular aid that you want to use must match with what students want to learn or needs to learn. Okay, so on this particular point, we are just talking about let's say you are teaching about the female reproductive system. You can't bring a model on maybe Maslow's hierarchy of need. You can't. You are teaching female reproductive system. You can't bring Maslow's hierarchy of need. That's what means lesson objective. You want to achieve something at the end of the day, because that particular audiovisual aid is going to need to describe or need to add more emphasis on what you are teaching. And how will Maslow's hierarchy of need help a learner to understand the female reproductive system? So that's what we mean by learning objective. What is the other point? We also have availability of that particular aid. The availability of that particular aid. That's point number 2. So of course, you want to use something that is easily accessible. And what is available at the moment? Okay, so let's say, for example, you want to teach the first year nursing students fundamentals of nursing, and you want to show them, you are teaching them the history about Florence Nightingale, and then you want to show them something that they can relate to Florence Nightingale. If you don't have the LCD, you can actually maybe just print out some of the pictures of Florence Nightingale before the session so that you show them, if you don't have an LCD to project. Then the other point is cost. How does cost affect the selection of audiovisual aids? So cost is talking about audiovisual aids should be affordable by the budget of the school. So if the school can't afford it, you can't use it. Then the other one is class size. How does class size mean? So in cases where you have a large class, so these large classes, they need visual aids that everyone can see and everyone can hear. If you're talking about the aids, the visuals, I mean the aids. That's why most of the time in lecture theaters there are even speakers so that people can hear. You can't go with the A4 picture model to demonstrate the male reproductive system in a 300 classroom. That's what we mean. Then the 5th point is learner's level. Okay, so the aid should suit the learner's understanding. You don't need to bring something that is too complicated that can even confuse a student. So bring something that is simple to understand. That is learner's level. Point 5. Then the last point 6 is time. Okay, so how does time affect the selection? Of course, you should have enough time to prepare and use the aid effectively. In a case where you know that you only have 1 hour and the LCD is going to take you 20 minutes for you to prepare that particular, for it to be on and to be set for you to start teaching, it's going to waste your time. So what you can do is do other things. Maybe if it's drawing, it's simple to draw, you can actually just draw it instead of using the LCD or maybe the TV. So these are 6 points. And then let's go to question number 4. How about question number 4? Compare and contrast formative and summative assessment. So this assessment is also one of the topic in nursing education, and it's very much important because assessment, this is the time now a student is assessed of the knowledge that they have been learning. So now in assessment, we have different types of assessment depending on various things: timing, purpose, why you want to assess, all those. Okay, so these 2 types of assessment, we want to compare them and contrast them. So we have things to look up here. Okay. An assessment is just measuring of how much a student has learned. And now what is formative assessment and summative assessment? Then we can now differentiate them. So the formative assessment is done during learning to give feedback. So in other words, the formative assessment, it helps a student to improve. It's an ongoing assessment. You want to check the progress of the student. However, on the summative assessment, if you're having issues in differentiating formative and the summative, just get the word summary, and then summary, just say summary usually comes at the end of a lesson. Here, therefore, the summative assessment comes most of the time as a final or at the end of something. So summative assessment is done after learning to judge the total achievement. So after summative assessment, I believe that will help you remember this. So most of the time, summative assessment is done after learning. So it's more like judging. If a student is writing their final exam, that is a summative assessment. If a student is writing midterm tests, those are formative assessment because you just want to test their progress. Now let's take their differences, and we need to earn 15 marks. So look at the marks allocation. 15 marks meaning you need to give 5 parameters that are going to contrast them and compare them. So now let's look at the first one is timing. We want to differentiate the two. Timing. So how is in terms of timing is the formative assessment done and the summative assessment done? So the formative assessment is done during learning. That is on timing, point number 1. It is done during learning. And then the summative assessment is done after teaching. That is timing. 2, we have the purpose. Why are you doing the assessment? The formative assessment is to give feedback and give improvement. You want to give feedback to the student. However, the purpose for summative assessment is to measure overall performance. Like when you are writing an exam, they don't give feedback or measure your performance. No, they give overall performance. Then the parameter number 3 is based on examples. What are some of the examples of the formative assessment? So formative assessment usually involve class quizzes, discussions, assignments. These are formative. However, on examples, the summative assessment involve final exams, end of term tests. Okay? Then on the feedback, parameter number 4, formative assessment is immediate and continuous. So immediately you learn a topic or maybe 4 topics, they assess you. And then it's ongoing. Okay? However, the feedback on the summative assessment is usually at the end with grades. They will tell you whether you're having A plus or B plus or D plus or E. And then what is the focus now? We are looking at parameter number 5, focus of both assessment. The formative assessment is a learning process. It's part of teaching. We want to evaluate your knowledge. We want to evaluate your understanding on a topic. However, the focus on the summative assessment is learning outcome. What have you gained at the end of the year, at the end of a semester? That is the summative. And then 6, we want the parameter number 6, we want to look at the effects on grades. What effect does it have on grades or these types of assessment? So the formative assessment may not count much towards final mark. They might not count much because most of the time you find that when students are writing their CS, test 1s, test 2s, it may be only add up to 40%. But how about the summative? It is contribute major part of the final mark. The summative assessment carries a lot of marks compared to formative assessment. And these are major differences, only 6 major parameters which I've mentioned. I differentiated them on timing, purpose, examples, feedback, focus, as well as effects on grades. And now let's go to question last, which is 5. Explain 6 ways of promoting deep learning in your students. You are explaining and not just listing. So follow the question carefully for you to inform us. So we are going to explain 6 ways of promoting deep learning in your students. So there are key points in this question. We have deep learning. What is deep learning? So deep learning is when students understand ideas fully. Okay? They try to connect them to real life. And they can apply, not just to memorize. That's what we mean by deep learning. Now, you as a tutor, how are you going to promote deep learning in a student? Okay, so now let's look at these 6 ways. Number 1, you encourage critical thinking in class. You need to ask questions that are going to promote deep learning and keep a learner on thinking about the answer. So questions like why and how. Why and how. Instead of you asking questions like what, list, mention, it doesn't give much of the, it doesn't compel them to do much. Then second, you need to use problem solving tasks. So problem solving tasks are in a situation where if at all you teach them, or in a situation where the way they learn in high school, more like an exercise. An exercise is part of the problem solving tasks. After learning, you give exercise, similar topics, similar questions, you see if the student is able to apply. And then the third one, you need to promote discussion and reflection. So discussion will allow the student to talk about what they have learned and reflect on it together. And if they're having issues, they can actually come back to the tutor and ask. Then the fourth point is to connect theory to practice. Okay? So you need to make sure that you use examples in a real nursing life. Okay? Or life experiences to help them catch up with the information. So after teaching, for example, after teaching them management of hypertension, and then you actually give them a situation where maybe someone has come with the same problem with hypertension, how are you going to manage them? And what medication in those lines? And then apart from that, you give meaningful feedback. You make sure that you reprimand their mistakes and tell them how to improve. Then the last one is to encourage independent learning. You need to let the student develop the mindset of researching on topics on their own. They're actually going to learn a lot of things and benefit more. And this wraps up this tutorial.